don't tell. You don't have to have been studying writing for long to have heard that advice. And it's crucial for creating compelling novels.
I'm not an author, and even I've heard that piece of advice. But what does it really mean to show, not tell?
Good question. Watch on and we'll tell you. Hi, I'm Tahlia Newland, the Managing Editor at Alkira Publishing.
And I'm Rose Newland, the book designer at Alkira Publishing. And this is Loki.
Show, don't tell means exactly what it says. You make your words show the story rather than have them tell it.
Does that mean that you use descriptive language to describe the action rather than tell the story?
Yeah.
Great. Video done.
It sounds simple, it really does. Nevertheless, it took me a long time to work out how to actually do it. But it's really worth the effort to get a handle on the difference between telling and showing.
Why is that?
Because if you're telling rather than showing your story, you're just not drawing the reader into the story. Showing the story really brings it to life.
So, how do you do it?
Well, you use descriptive, active language. Language that makes the reader feel as if they're right there in the scene, seeing the events for themselves. So rather than hearing somebody who's standing outside the story, telling the story.
Right. So instead of saying, for instance, George was angry, you'd say, George stomped across the room with his hands clenched in fists.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
It is a good example.
So it's more words.
Yes.
But more visceral.
Not always more words, but yeah. It shows the reader what's actually happening in the scene. So it's like instead of you saying he was a handsome man, you'd say he had a strong jaw and piercing eyes, right?
I've read that one a lot.
I know, it's hard to be original after a while, but, so the reader can visualise this person, right? Instead of hearing the author's interpretation of what they're seeing, the reader sees what the author's seeing. So you've shown them exactly what was happening in the scene and you've let the reader see it for themselves rather than telling the reader what the narrator drew from the action. So in the case of George stomping across the room, you allow the reader to decide for themselves that he was angry rather than telling him he was angry.
Yeah. Is that really such a problem though? Like plenty of old-fashioned books and the classics that I've read are more telling than showing, right?
Well, the word old-fashioned being the key there. In the past, authors didn't have to compete with movies and TV and video games.
Action movies.
Yeah, so writing really has to be much more exciting and engaging these days. If you just tell the story rather than show it, the reader is passive and uninvolved, unless you're a really, really good writer, like really extraordinarily good.
Right.
Then you can
you're
write in
competing
an expositional way and it's still engaging.
Right. But you are competing with like Die Hard 7, so
yeah,
think about that.
It's really better that you learn to show rather than tell, because learning to write like, Jane Austen or something is not something most of us can do.
Bit of an outdated style
as
well.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think people,
I didn't have Die Hard 7 back then.
It's not my kind of movie,
No, well, you
Bridgerton.
would read Jane Austen novel instead of watching Die Hard 7.
I was reading Dostoevsky when I was 14.
I'm not sure I want to watch Die Hard 7 either.
But your point, your point is absolutely taken. And I think for the modern writer, showing rather than telling is good advice.
So telling is also called expositional prose because you're espousing something, right?
Yes, exactly. And who wants to listen to someone espousing?
Let me get on my soapbox and espouse this novel to you. So that's sort of what you do when you're writing an essay, and you don't want your novel to sound like an essay. Or if you're standing on a soapbox, you're espousing.
Yeah. So telling is fine in non-fiction, obviously.
Yes.
It's quite suitable.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to write your essay showing rather than telling. But in fiction, you need to make your scenes really vivid so that you immerse the reader in the story.
And so what's the best way to do that, to immerse a reader in a story?
Well, I think when you're writing as an author, you've got to imagine yourself in the scene and describe what it's like there. What are people doing? And write like you're the character. And what are you feeling? What are your senses picking up on? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you smelling? And so on. So you describe how the world feels to the characters so the reader can feel those senses for themselves.
Yeah. So I remember that from English, actually, is appealing to the senses. So
Yes.
the aim being, if you appeal to the senses, you make the reader feel as if they're right there in the scene themselves.
That's right. Yeah. So you
sight, smell, taste,
Yeah.
touch.
and even things like the light quality and that kind of thing. Sight, sound, touch, taste,
Smell.
smell.
Okay.
So the idea is that you engage the reader's imagination and create a sense of presence. It's all about bringing the scenes to life. And this book, The Elements of Active Prose, is basically all the details about how you actually technically show and don't tell. So even though there's sections in here that are specifically talking about showing and telling, active prose, as distinct from passive prose, active prose is showing. Passive prose is telling. And I'm not talking about passive voice as just a sentence construction.
That's a whole other thing.
That's just one thing. Active prose is writing so that you're showing rather than telling, essentially. So this, of course, is my book on writing, and it's a small book, so it's not a big read, but honestly, it's very succinct. Everything in here is great detail. So here's a little passage about what telling is. Telling has a narrator between the reader and the action. So the reader stands outside the action and somewhat remote from the character. Readers are constantly reminded that they're reading because the narrator tells us that the character did, saw, heard, or felt something, rather than the reader seeing it for themselves. Here's what showing is. Showing describes what the character sees, hears, does, and so on directly, as if the action takes place now right in front of the reader. It's more immediate and places the reader right in the action. It engages the reader in a very powerful way. So here's an example of telling. Sam was sad. How would you make that into showing?
Sam moped about the house.
With his head down, his shoulders slumped, sniffing every now and then.
Yeah, Sam cried would be a more efficient way of doing it.
Yes. So you get the idea. Yeah. So, of course, there's much more detail in this book about how to show rather than tell. So I suggest you get it. It's had lots of accolades from editors who also find it a very useful book for their editing work. I'll put a link about this book in the description.
Subtle plug. So subtle.
Hey, look, I was just doing this course, right? And they said you have to have a call to action.
I know.
You can't leave
It's
it up to
true.
the person.
And it should be in the middle of the video, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, do you want to do it? Let me just do
That's
that.
a really good book. Where'd you get that from?
It actually is a really good book. Believe me. I wish that I'd had this book when I first started writing. It would have saved me years of trying to find out all this information for myself.
And you've distilled it into such a small and digestible package with a great cover, I might add. You can find a link to this book in the description below.
Yeah, I really recommend that you get it. It is really, seriously, a great tool for every writer. And I'm actually being honest, might be a plug for my book, but it's true.
All right, I think we've covered that. So that's the other thing, when I am reading a book and I just completely forget that I'm reading and I've just been in this other world for hours and I come out, that's a real sign of really good prose, isn't it? It's
absolutely.
That's when you just completely forget that you're reading, that means you've been in a book that's showing, not telling.
Pretty much. Yeah.
And all the points we've given on developing characters and writing good dialogue in our previous videos, that all feeds into your book's showing rather than telling as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. That's right. So, the better you handle all of those other elements, right, like world building and character and that kind of thing and plot, the stronger your book will be.
And if you want to know about those elements in more detail, head to our channel and check out the playlist we've got called Novel Writing Tips, the author's journey from conception to publication. But does the whole book have to be shown, not told? Like, wouldn't that get really wordy at a certain point?
Yes, yes, it would. Connecting sections can be told. In fact, they should be told, really.
Okay.
Just the key scenes need to be shown.
Right, so use with discretion. So you don't want to fall into the trap of describing every single little thing in the scene.
Definitely not. And we will be doing a video on how to write descriptions soon to help you get the balance right of how much to describe and how much to leave out. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that.
Showing instead of telling is a key element in creating captivating novels. And for more detail on this, you really need to get the Elements of Active Prose. It's got all the tips on how to actually do it.
Yeah, because if you're using active prose instead of passive prose, you're showing instead of telling. So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please subscribe, like it, leave a comment. Let us know how you go with showing and telling in your novels. And of course, don't miss the rest of the
series. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, subscribe to make sure you don't miss any more videos in this series.
Yes.
Check the playlist. Novel writing tips.
And buy this book, it's good. Goodbye.
I don't know how I'm going to edit that.